Good to have you with us this morning in our study in Hebrews. We're in our 21st lesson. This is Hebrews chapter 6. We're going to be looking at beginning with verses 9 through 12, and we will get into chapter 7. But in verses 9 through 12, he says, "But beloved, we are convinced of better things concerning you, and things that accompany salvation, though we are speaking in this way. For God is not unjust, so as to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name, in having ministered and are still ministering to the saints. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence, so as to realize the full assurance of hope until the end, so that you will not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promise." Now, the writer still had confidence in the integrity of some of his readers, despite his scolding. Although some had irretrievably fallen away, he's still convinced that many of them are still faithful. Some were still holding on to their salvation. And he acknowledges the fact that God is righteous to remember those who serve faithfully. Now, although they had failed to mature in the word of righteousness, for which he certainly gave them a strong rebuke, they had continued to be diligent in their service and love for one another, and the writer doesn't fail to acknowledge this in verse 10. And apparently this carries a great deal of weight with the Almighty. They may have still been infantile in their knowledge and understanding of the Word of God, but they loved one another. And they showed it. They demonstrated that love for one another. And this seems to be important with God. Although they were urged toward the same diligence, these may be kind of like those of 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Some are weak, some are sick, some are asleep. But the writer admonishes them to continue to show the same diligence. In other words, same kind of diligence according to the work and love ministry to the saints unto the end. To realize the full assurance of hope. This is confidence in our relationship with God. This is the hope that is represented in verses 18 and 19 as one that enters into the presence beyond the veil. Now, this hope embraces the expectation of a better state of being than any that we have in this life. And our hope is to be understood as sure, as something steadfast, as something that isn't going to be taken from us. This is something we can depend on. It says, "Do not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promise." Verse 12. So the writer is going to offer a list of these heroes of faith in chapter 11. And these are men and women whose faith is certainly bears imitating. Problem is, that imitation could cost you greatly, as it did them. Great cost to being faithful sometimes. Unfruitfulness is the result of spiritual laziness or indifference. If we're going to imitate these heroes of faith, don't you think that this means learning the lessons of their lives that are recorded in Scripture? This means study. This means learning to understand the lessons that come out of these texts, generalizing these lessons. You can't do that if you don't know the text. How can you imitate something that you are not familiar with? This unfruitfulness, this spiritual laziness or indifference, this only has one outcome, and this disaster. Only faithfulness inherits the promise. Now, how can one hope by any means to be saved by faith if their life does not demonstrate faithfulness? That seems a contradiction. Faithfulness is what separated these from those who had fallen away, isn't it? Faithfulness is what separates these from those whose bodies fell in the wilderness, in chapters 3 and 4. Verses 13 through 20, looking at the immutability of God. And he begins with the promise of the oath in verse 13 through 18. He says, "For when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply you. And so having patiently waited, he obtained the promise. For men swear by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath given as confirmation as an end to every dispute. In the same way, God, desiring even more to show to the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, interposed with an oath, so that by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have taken refuge would have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us." What are the two immutable things by which God cannot lie? The promise and the oath. If he gives a promise, that's the end of the matter. If he swears by an oath, it's just as sure. So the purpose is that which was the promise is that which was made to Abraham by the Lord in Genesis chapter 22, that God would both bless him and multiply his seed. This was the promise made to Abraham after the Lord had tested him concerning Isaac and the offering of his son. We'll spend considerable time looking at that when we get to chapter 11. When it comes to time and the promises of God, we tend to allow time to rob us of our confidence, don't we? And I think that's more natural to us than we would care to admit. We have an unfortunate tendency to hold God and his promises accountable to our expectations, and I know I have certainly fallen prey to this myself. But this may be especially true when I think we're dealing with times of great struggle in our personal life. We want God to intervene. We want God to bless us with patience right now. We want God to comfort us. And when that doesn't come immediately, God hasn't done what he said he would do. And if God hasn't done it by now, he isn't going to. And this seems to be our attitude. We allow time to become a factor. Yes.
Or we just give up and move on to something else.
Give up. No, God's not going to do this. Wasting my time and prayer. This is not how Abraham addressed the problem. In fact, the text says he waited patiently for the promise of God. That's interesting because Abraham was 75 years old in Genesis chapter 12 when God first made the promise to him to make him a father of many nations, not just the nation of Israel, many nations. By the lifespan of the time Abraham was beginning to approach middle age, he was 75 years old.
75 years old.
I don't think that's the case anymore. It doesn't prove to be to me. Is it, Jerry? He was between 80 and 85 when God promised to give him a son out of his own body. That had to be a revelation. In Genesis chapter 15, God told him that he would give him a son out of his own loin, because by this time Abraham has already figured out, I don't have a child. Sarah is too old. She's too barren. Eliezer, who has been my servant, raised in my house, he will be my heir. And God says, oh no, no. I'm going to give you a son out of your own body. Well, by the time he's between 80 and 85, God confirms this again. And by now, the biological clock is beginning to run out. So he and Sarah come up with the idea they're going to help God along. So they chose the Hagar option. 1 year later, Abraham is 86 years old when Ishmael is born. 14 years later, Abraham is 99 years old, and God says, I'm going to give you a son out of Sarah. New revelation. Yes.
What bloodline did that produce, the Hagar and Ishmael?
The Ishmaelites,
And even beyond
well,
that?
Arab nations. But, by this time, he's 99 years old, in Genesis chapter 17, and now for the first time, God mentions Sarah. I'm not going to just give you a son out of your body, I'm going to give you a son out of her body. That was a brand new revelation. And when he's 100 years old, and Sarah is 90, maybe 91, Isaac was born. And yet, for 25 years now, Abraham had trusted that God would give him an heir just as he promised, even beyond the normal time of childbearing. Even after Sarah's already barren body had become so old that it was absolutely beyond the scope of possibility for her to even consider having a child. It wasn't even possible when she was young. It's most certainly not possible now.
But isn't that the way God works, though?
God doesn't.
Isn't that what happens, and when it happens, you can only come to the conclusion it was only God.
Right. God doesn't seem to do favorable conditions, does he?
No.
That's why he does it. It puts it beyond any scope of human intervention. There's no way this can be done through man. But still, Abraham believed God even against all the barriers of physics and physiology that were very real, they were very present. And perhaps this is why the Lord appeared to Abraham in Genesis 18 to inform him, you're only going to have to wait 1 more year. By this time next year, Sarah is going to have a son, yes.
And this bloodline produced
The
The
Jews,
Jews.
the Israelites.
Most of us believe like Sarah. She was 89 and he was 99. Thomas came. She got a big laugh out of it.
Yeah.
Big laugh.
You're going to do what? How would you like to have a baby at 99?
Well, Abraham had a baby.
90.
She had a big laugh. No.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that we do the same thing. We'll laugh at something we've asked God to bless us with, and it hasn't come when we want it to, but yet we forget from whence He has brought us or what He has already done for us.
Right.
And instead of saying, I'm going to wait as long as it takes because God has proven Himself, a lot of times we as humans, we forget what God has given us and done for us and through us
Yeah.
to wait for what it is.
Yeah. Well, I think he was being kind to Abraham when he appeared to him and said, by this time next year.
I was talking about her response.
Huh?
I was referring more to her response with the laugh. But
Yeah,
here's the thing.
right.
There were times, and I was trying to bring it back to our life.
Yeah.
There's times we'll laugh at something because it didn't happen when we thought God should have done it.
Yeah.
But yet we forget, just like Sarah forgot what God had done for them in the past. So the faith should have been there no matter what it seemed like.
Yeah.
Well, and my question, was she laughing at herself for not trusting, or was she laughing at God?
External circumstances. I mean, she's looking at what she can see, according to the text.
She's laughing
She's laughing
because
at
it's
the
unbelievable.
situation. Like, okay, I'm 70, how old is she at that time?
99,
She's
she's,
90.
she's
How old
90,
is she?
90 years old.
Okay, I'm 90, my husband's 99, we're gonna have a baby. Excuse me, ha ha ha. I mean, I think it was like that. I really do.
Yeah,
We do
she's
the
laughing
same
at
thing.
the seeming absurdity of the idea.
In the context,
Yeah.
that's pretty certain, because she got God scolded her for it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
for a life.
Yeah, yeah.
But the Lord, the Lord knows it just makes
That
sense.
is true. That does speak to your point.
Yeah.
But the physical seed of Abraham is quite far-reaching. Abraham didn't have just 2 sons. He had 8 sons. So the seed of Abraham got to be rather extensive. Isaac, you had Ishmael, Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shuah. This represents a massive seed line. God meant what he said, I'm going to make you a father of many nations. 8 here, to be exact, according to the flesh. But even beyond that, those heirs of the promise, through Isaac, all nations, those of all nations who possess the faith of Abraham, are sons of
The
Abraham.
Christian nation?
Yes. What's the purpose of the oath? It was not to swear, it was not sworn to bind God to the fulfillment of his promise. God is going to do what he said to do. God doesn't need an oath to ensure his faithfulness. His promise is sufficient in itself. The oath was for confirmation of the promise to those to whom it was given. The oath was for the benefit of Abraham, for the benefit of his heirs according to faith. It was to ensure them that God would indeed fulfill what he promised. The oath confirms the immutability of God. He simply cannot fail. Text says he swore by himself. Why did he swear by himself?
No greater.
There is
Nothing
no
greater.
one greater. God can only swear by himself. Men instinctively and naturally swear by whatever is greater. All kinds of oaths. In fact, there were 2 basic types. You had the lesser and the greater. The lesser oaths were sworn by such things as one's right shoe or one's right hand or one's right thigh, the souls of the dead, the ashes of one's father, the lives of one's friend. I always thought that was kind of interesting. If I don't keep mine in the bargain, you can kill my buddy Joe. They swore by such things as salt on the head of the temple. The salt covenant's an interesting one, because the salt covenant was part of the sacrificial arrangement. Leviticus chapter 2, through the rest of that chapter, you talk about salt being added to grain offerings. In fact, in verse 13, he says, "And every offering of your grain offering, you shall season with salt. You shall not allow the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your grain offerings. With all of your offerings, you shall offer salt." Like all of the other covenant types, a salt covenant was just an agreement between 2 or more parties, and an arrangement that involved salt typically symbolized something that was perpetual, something that was incorruptible, something that was indissoluble, something that was going to stand forever. Let me give you a perfect example. Remember when God made his covenant with David? I will raise up one of your descendants to sit upon your throne forever. Interesting covenant. But an interesting take on that covenant comes out of 2 Chronicles chapter 13 when Abijah, king of Judah, reminded Jeroboam that God had given the dominion over Israel to David forever, to him and his sons by a covenant of salt. Interesting passage. The greater oaths were sworn upon only one thing, and that was God. All greater oaths sworn upon God. And there's two basic ingredients to an oath. There's the invocation. This calls God to witness the oath between the two parties. God would hold both parties accountable to keep their end of the agreement. And then there was the imprecation, which calls upon God to punish the one who doesn't fulfill his part of the oath. The purpose of God's oath is to instill within us a strong consolation in the faithfulness of God. He simply cannot lie. The compounding of the promise with an oath, I don't know what to compare that. If you're familiar with the Greek language, anytime you have negatives compounded, in English you can't use a double negative. You can't not use a double negative. But in Greek, when you compound negatives one on top of the other, it lays stress to the negative.
To the first negative?
Well, you can stack. Paul is a master at this. Times he will stack one negative on top of another to confirm the impossibility of it. And this kind of reminds me of that. You're stacking one oath on top of a promise, and all it does is enhance the impossibility of faith. All right, verses 18 through 20, the hope set before us. We have fled for refuge, and this would have had a great deal of significance to his Jewish readers. There were two places of refuge provided for Israel. What were they? Cities of refuge. There was actually 6. There was 3 on each side of the Jordan. These were the cities of the Levites, to which one who had killed a man in an accident or something, or in self-defense, he could flee to the city of refuge, to the city of the one of the cities of the Levites, the one nearest him. He could flee there, and he could stay there and wait for his case to be heard by the high priest. This was a city of refuge. The other place was the horns of the altar in the holy place. 1 and 2 Kings. When Adonijah, the brother of Solomon, one of the sons of David, when David was on his deathbed, Adonijah had it in his mind, I'm going to be the next king. He was already planning his inaugurations. He had already thrown a feast. His friends had come. He was essentially appointing himself as king. He just knew he was going to be the next king. Then he gets word that David has appointed Solomon as king. So what does he do? He runs to the tabernacle and he lays his hand on the horns of the altar. And he says, I will not come out unless you promise not to slay me. So they brought him before Solomon. Solomon said, go home. Different story in chapter 2. Because when Joab tried the same thing, when he knew Solomon had been appointed king, he ran to the tabernacle, laid his hands on the horns of the altar, and Solomon was told this, and he said, "Go get him and bring him before me." Well, the runner comes back, he said he's not going to leave. And Solomon said, "Okay, you go and kill him where he stands." Presumably, he was killed with his hands.
I found these results.
What in the world is that? He was killed presumably with his hands still holding the horns of the altar. But anyway, those were the two places of refuge. The fact that we have fled for refuge is an acknowledgement of guilt. We know we've done wrong. We know we are in danger of judgment, so we flee for refuge from the wrath of God. The altar to which we flee is the cross. It's there that we take hold of the hope that is set before us. And this is where we flee for mercy, that we make our appeal to God through Christ our high priest. The anchor of our souls is that which holds us firm and unmovable to Christ. It's a hope that enters beyond the veil, he says. Now, this entering for refuge is more than just that of 1 Kings chapters 1 and 2, which entered into the holy place of an earthly tabernacle. This entering in of the hope, we have access to true Holy of Holies. And we can enter there because Christ entered first. And we can follow the high priest into the Holy of Holies, something that was completely unheard of under the first covenant. Now, our entering is a result of his having entered first. Any questions or comments on chapter 6? All right, in chapter 7, interesting chapter, yes? He brings up Melchizedek. He brought him up in chapter 5, end of chapter 5. Now he's going to bring him up again. Jesus, and he's comparing Jesus' high priesthood to that of Melchizedek. Who is this Melchizedek? Lots of interesting speculation built around this as to who Melchizedek may have been, and these speculations range from the possible to the absolute absurd. One speculation is that he might have been Christ, who pre-incarnate Christ, who served as the high priest unto God. But there is absolutely no evidence from Scripture to suggest this. Another speculation is that he may have been the Holy Spirit. He may have been an angel. Some suggest that he may have been Enoch. Problem is that by the time Abraham meets Melchizedek, Enoch has been gone for over 1,000 years. Some suggest that he may have been Shem, the son of Noah. Some say that he was an extraordinary emanation of deity, whatever that means. Perhaps he was none of these. But the problem is that there's absolutely no supporting evidence from Scripture for any of these theories. They're merely speculations, and all of these play to the mystery that surrounds the man. The only speculation that may possibly have any valid talking points is that he could possibly have been Shem, the son of Noah. Because Abraham and Shem are contemporaries. Shem lives long enough to see Isaac. So it's possible. My only question with that was, where was Shem's inheritance? Where was the land of his inheritance? When they divided up the flood, where did Shem settle? You don't know. Melchizedek, the title, this is not a name, this is not a proper name. Melchizedek is a title. It would seem that the ancient kings of pre-Israel Jerusalem were called Zedeks. Now, we don't know if there were Zedeks prior to Melchizedek, but we know that there were certainly Zedeks who followed Melchizedek in that line. This means that Melchizedek was part of a line of Zedeks, like the Pharaohs, or the Caesars, these kinds of, the Zedeks, they were a line of kings. Now Melchizedek is from Melchi, meaning king, and Zedek, meaning righteousness, thus king of righteousness. Also king of Salem, meaning king of peace. Salem means peace. Now this Salem would later be called Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Which means what? The foundation of peace. In Joshua, more than 500 years later, Joshua chapter 10, verse 1, we're going to run into another Zedek. Adonai Zedek. So the Zedeks had quite a long time of reign, at least 500 years, from the time of Abraham to the time of Joshua. Quite a reign of history. This Adonai Zedek he was an evil man. In fact, he was the one who gathered this coalition of Canaanite kings to make war on the Gibeonites, whom Joshua had just made a covenant with of peace. So they come against the Gibeonites. So Joshua goes up and he defeats these kings. And he hangs Adonai Zedek and the rest of these kings, or has them killed, and then he hangs their bodies from a tree. So there's a lot of difference between this Melchizedek and this Adonai Zedek. Somewhere in this 500 years of history, things have changed. Melchizedek, king of Salem, and high priest of the Most High God. This man was a worshiper of Jehovah. But somewhere between the time of Melchizedek and the reign of Adonai Zedek, the worship of Jehovah in Salem had disappeared. And that it had become a godless nation. Now, sometime between that reign, you had a reign of godless kings that no longer apparently remembered God or Melchizedek. What is the nature of Melchizedek? I think the text is very clear that he was a man. Now see how great this one is. And that reading comes out of the Young's Literal Translation. Most of your translations will read, see how great this man was, or see how great this Melchizedek was, or see how great this one, or see how great he was, something of that effect. But the word man is not represented in the text either by anthropos or anir. The gender is, however, provided by the pronoun eton. This is a nominative masculine singular for this one. Now, technically, admittedly, This does not make Melchizedek a flesh and blood man, not in itself. It merely represents him as a masculine. God is also referred to in the masculine, that doesn't make him a man, does it? So this doesn't necessarily say that he's a flesh and blood man. However, the fact that Melchizedek is a high priest of God demands that he be taken from where? Melchizedek is a high priest. And chapter 5, verse 1 says that every high priest is taken out of man. So this demands that he's taken out of man. Now typically, well, before I get into that, let me make this point. As a type, Jesus was also taken out of man, wasn't he? If he's taken out of man, then by the nature of typology, Melchizedek must also be taken out from among men to serve in that capacity. This is the nature of a high priest. Now, as a man, Melchizedek had a genealogy. This is certainly suggested by the fact that he was one of a line of kings. When a king passes his throne to someone else, to whom does he generally pass it? An heir of some kind, whether it be a son, a nephew, someone of the family line. So if he is king and priest and he passes this throne on, which we know that he did because the line continues for 500 years apparently. This means that he had to be a member of some family line in order to pass that throne down. Now regardless, the throne he had to be part of a human family unit. And his priesthood, on the other hand, is something entirely different. Unlike the throne, his priesthood did not pass to another, whose genealogy was not derived from them. And who is the them? Talking about the Levites. He did not get his priestly position from the Levites. He preceded the Levites. And since this is stated in the positive, the first thing that this says about Melchizedek is that he had, the first thing it says about his genealogy is that he had one. Whose genealogy, that's a positive, was not traced through Levi. He had a genealogy, it just wasn't traced through Levi. Melchizedek is both king and priest, verses 1 through 3. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, let me see how much I've got here. Just about out of time, but I think I can manage this. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of kings, and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth of all, first being translated to king of righteousness, then also king of peace, meaning king of Salem, meaning king of peace, without mother, without father, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, made like the Son of God, remained a priest continually. So, Melchizedek is only one of many shadows of symbols of Christ in the Old Testament. Now, it's important to remember that what serves as a symbol of a thing is never the thing itself. He was not pre-incarnate Christ. Melchizedek is the example of how the function of both offices of king and priest are fulfilled in one man. And the two offices of king and priest are manifestly contrary to one another, inasmuch as the administration of one stands in stark opposition to that of the other. As king, what does the king do? He administers justice to the sinner. What is the penalty? Death. As a priest, he's the administrator of mercy. How can you administer one and then administer the other? How can you administer mercy to a man you killed for a crime? How can you kill a man for a crime to whom you've administered mercy? The two stand diametrically opposed to one another. So how do you satisfy this function in just one man? Mercy can't be satisfied, or it can't satisfy the demands of justice, because if you do, then the sinner goes unpunished, and justice is not served. On the other hand, the administration of justice to the sinner is a complete absence of mercy, because the penalty for sin is death. So how can both offices be effected in one man to render both justice and mercy at the same time to one man? As king, he renders the sentence of death to the sinner. The person deserves to die. What is it he tells us in Ezekiel 18? The man who sins, he shall die. That is the penalty for sin. Because the demand for justice must be met for God to hold, for God's holiness, in order for God's holiness to be satisfied. Someone has to die for the sin. Punishment has to be meted out. It's God's justice that protects His holiness. So for God to allow sin to go unpunished is a violation of His nature. Now, as high priest, He must supply mercy to the sinner, for this is the function of the office. The sinner is guilty, and it's imperative that the sin be punished. So how do you satisfy both? He has to pardon the offender and allow him to go unpunished. But if you do that, how do you satisfy the demands of justice and extend mercy to the sinner? I think this probably suggests that there was a sacrificial system in place with Melchizedek, where offering was made on behalf of the offender, just like there was in Leviticus. But you see this all the way back to the time of Adam and Eve. When Job and his friends, when his friends sinned, what did God tell his friends? You have Job offer a sacrifice for you. So, yeah, atonement is made. Yes, yeah. So there was a sacrificial atonement typology already in place. Apparently this is something exercised also by Melchizedek. But as high priest, Melchizedek still exercises mercy. Jesus himself, he paid the penalty for all sin, for all men, for all time. Calvary was a satisfaction of God to expedite His justice on all the sins of humanity, from the beginning of time to the end of time. Thus, as high priest, He's able to extend mercy and pardon all who will appropriate to themselves the blood of Christ for that atonement. And we're out of time. Any questions or comments? We'll pick up next week looking further at Melchizedek. In fact, he is the man without father and mother. We're going to take